This is Land of Havilah, Genesis chapter 2. The first 6 days of the last chapter don't quite make a week. One more day to go. Verse 1. The heavens, the earth, and all their vast array were finished. On the seventh day God finished his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because he rested in it from all his work of creation which he had done. Comment in verses 2 and 3, God rested on the seventh day and called it holy. Just like our week is 7 days today, so it was at creation. Coming much later during the time of Moses, God will command rest for the ancient Israelites on the seventh day of the week. He'll call it the Sabbath. That completes the first week, but coming up the text will go back in time to give some more details of creation. Verse 4. This is the history of the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens. Comment. In chapter 1, when it said many times evening and morning a day, the context indicated 6 24-hour days because it said evening and morning. But in verse 4 we just read, we have the same Hebrew word for day, which is yom, but it indicates a period of time in the past. Quote, in the day that Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens, end quote. The English and Hebrew words for day are exactly alike in that they can indicate a 24-hour period of time, or they can indicate that the time that the sun's in the sky, or a longer period of time, such as in the day of the dinosaurs. The Hebrew word yom is exactly the same, so if we want to know what a day is in Genesis 1, the only way to know is by the context. In verse 4, we find the word Yahweh for the first time. Most English translations say Lord in all capital letters here rather than Yahweh. Let's explain. In the original Hebrew Bible, we find a 4-letter word spelled with the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, He, which spells Yahweh. It appears almost 7,000 times in the Old Testament. God called himself by many names, but Yahweh was the most common. Yahweh is a proper name of the one true God. How do we know that? Because Moses asked God his name at the burning bush, and God answered Yahweh, Exodus 3:15. Or we might pronounce Yod He Vav He as Yehovah or Jehovah, but Yahweh seems closest. Unfortunately, if we use L-O-R-D in the place of Yahweh, as do many of our English translations, we have some problems. For one, Lord sounds nothing like the Hebrew name of God. Second, Hebrew has a word for Lord, which is Adonai. When we translate Yahweh into Lord, we're confusing the Hebrew terms Adonai and Yahweh. Third, in English, Lord isn't a name, it's a title or an office. It's similar to Sir. Lord is okay, but Yahweh is what the Hebrew text says 7,000 times, so to get around those problems that many of our English translations just keep perpetuating, this translation brings Yahweh straight into English without translating it. Whenever most Bibles say L-O-R-D in all capital letters, the Hebrew word Yahweh is behind it, but here in the World English Bible it's just straight up Yahweh, and I like it. Now coming up, the text is going to tell us more about the 6 days of creation, especially about the creation of man. On to verse 5. No plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain on the earth. There was not a man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Yahweh God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Yahweh God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Comment. Here we have the famous Garden of Eden. In verse 5, notice that this is a world without rain. A mist comes up from the ground to water the earth. The importance of this is coming up. In verse 7, notice that God gave man life by breathing his own breath into man's nostrils. Coming up, note very carefully the names of the 2 trees. Verse 9. Out of the ground Yahweh God made every tree to grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it was parted and became the source of 4 rivers. The name of the first is Pishon. It flows through the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are also there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the same river that flows through the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Hiddekel. This is the one which flows in front of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. Comment: in verse 9 there were many trees, including the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why the details about the rivers? In verse 10 there's one river coming out of Eden, which became the source of 4 other rivers. In verse 5 there was no rain, only mist, so it seems there's nothing to drink on the earth except river water. You can't drink mist. With no rain, what was the source of the one river in Eden? Where did that water come from? At the end of Revelation, we see the restoration of perfection, and we find that there's a river of water of life flowing from the throne of God. From the description of the river in Revelation, we don't know what to make of it, whether it's water as we understand water to be, or whether the water's something beyond our capacity to understand. But since God was the source of that river in Revelation, could it be that God was the source of the river in Eden, that the river in Eden was more than a river as we understand it? Jesus said that He gives living water, and because of it we'll never thirst, John 4:10 and 11. Maybe we should learn here that man cannot live without the water of life that comes from God. Mist won't cut it. As to the other rivers, the Euphrates River in verse 14 is in the Middle East, as is the Hiddekel River, also mentioned in verse 14, also translated Tigris River. We don't know much about the Gihon River, which is in Cush in verse 13, except that Cush is somewhere in the vicinity of the Red Sea. In verses 11 and 12, the river Pishon flows through a place called the land of Havilah. Other than Eden, Havilah is the place to be because it has that river which is a source of life, and there's gold, which the text pointedly says was good, and there's bdellium and onyx stone. Bdellium is an expensive tree resin used in perfume and incense. Onyx is a beautiful stone. If we cut and polish onyx, we see beautiful unending patterns in every color of the rainbow. So Havilah has it all. There's life, true riches, beauty, and everything to fill up the senses. It sounds like a description of something to do with God, like heaven, or like the Word of God, which has it all. So that's why we call the name of this project Land of Havilah. We want to describe all the good things of God. The Bible mentions another Havilah somewhere on the Sinai Peninsula in Genesis 25:18 and 1 Samuel 15:7, but we have to assume it's a different Havilah because it doesn't fit the description of the one here in verse 11. Verse 15, Yahweh God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate and keep it. Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but you shall not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it you will surely die. Comment: man may eat from any tree whatsoever except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Verse 17, God says, In the day that you eat of it you will surely die. Here God's introduced the possibility that man will rebel. He's given man free will. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Since God's already said everything was very good, we have to assume that free will is very good. It comes to mind that it's a very good thing to listen to God. You and I want to scream at the man right now, please listen. Coming up after the command about the tree, verse 18, Yahweh God said, It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. Out of the ground Yahweh God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. Whatever the man called every living creature became its name. The man gave names to all livestock, and to the birds of the sky, and to every animal of the field, but for man there was not found a helper comparable to him. Yahweh God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. As the man slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Yahweh God made a woman from the rib which he had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. The man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man will leave his father and his mother and will join with his wife, and they will be one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. Comment: verse 25 describes the man and woman as man and wife. So by the man's declaration in verse 23 that the two of them are one flesh, and by God's design that he made the woman for the man, they're a married couple. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, men and women can choose to marry or not. In verse 24, since they're one flesh, if they war with each other, they'll be warring with themselves. Quote, He who loves his own wife loves himself, Ephesians 5:28. In verse 18, the wife isn't inferior. She's comparable. Quote, I will make a helper comparable to him. End quote. 1 Corinthians 11:3, the husband is the head of the wife, but husband beware, you should love your wife as yourself. Ephesians 5:33. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the assembly and gave himself up for it. End quote. 1 Peter 3:7, the husband should give honor to the wife because the two are joint heirs of the grace of life. In verse 25, they were naked and not ashamed. No one has anything to be ashamed of yet. Mark your next search for Genesis 3 at landofhavilah.net, Genesis 3.